So, hello and welcome. My name's Steve Nobel, and today I'm speaking with Karen Bell on developing incredible psychic vision. So, Karen is a clairvoyant, spiritual medium, and channel. She's a channel for an Andromedan star being named Sarai, I think, Sarai, who identifies herself as an ambassador for multidimensional collective of Andromedan healers. And Saray's intention is to help us shift our energy and invoke healing by releasing the misperceptions, limiting beliefs, and false narratives which are out of alignment with source energy. And Karen's been offering intuitive readings since 2007. She's an active lecturer and medium in the Canadian spiritualist community, and she was privately mentored by Tony Stockwell, a UK, I know of Tony Stockwell, psychic medium, and her website is intuitivekb.com. So hi, Karen.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Steve.
Did I get the name right? Is it Sarai?
Sarai. Very
Sarai.
close.
Oh, Sarai. Oh, it sounds very, very beautiful, Sarai.
Thank
So I want to ask you, first of all, you say something about how you got into all of this,
Yeah,
your
sure.
journey.
It was very unexpected, I would say, and spontaneous. So in my early 20s, which would have been the early 2000s, I was a makeup artist, and I was happy doing that. But what happened was that as I was doing people's makeup and interacting with people, I started to become aware of, I guess what I know now would be psychic impressions. So I would know things about them that maybe I shouldn't know. These weren't things that they said verbally. I noticed that when they would talk about one of their loved ones, whether that was their spouse or even their dog, if they said that person or animal's name, that I would have this flash of like knowingness of what that person or that animal was like, a sense of their personality. I could also pick up very clearly on their genuine emotional state, even if they weren't communicating that, through body language, let's say, or words. So all this started happening, when I was an artist, in a sense. And then that made me curious because I realized something was happening that was very unusual. And that's when I started studying psychic development. And I started giving readings just for free. And it was mainly when I started giving readings, it was just out of curiosity. It was just like, I want to find out if this was real. So I put an ad out on the classifieds, which at that time was Kijiji. And I just put this ad out, free psychic readings. I didn't give my name. The only thing I had the detail about the other person I would have was their first name. And then I started giving these phone readings. And I guess to my amazement, there was a lot of accuracy. So that's when I started studying more deeply psychic development and then mediumship a little bit later on.
Okay, wow. Well, I guess boyfriends would soon find out that they can't try and mislead you in the past.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. I think when you it activates, right, those spidey senses or your intuition, right? So you can tell when people are lying, you can tell if there's a vibe that's off, right? And you get better at that as time goes by. So,
Yeah, absolutely. What is psychic vision? For those who are kind of going, what is psychic vision? I'm just tuning in and finding this interesting. I want to know more.
right. So I would describe psychic vision as one of the intuitive abilities, specifically clairvoyance. So we have, each and every one of us have many different psychic abilities or psychic senses, right? Some are related to feeling, some are related to, auditory impressions, but psychic vision is really related to clairvoyance or that sense of inner vision of you're receiving psychic information visually. And it comes in either two ways. There are actually two different types of clairvoyance. There's subjective clairvoyance, which I'd say is the more common one, and then objective clairvoyance. Objective clairvoyance is when people actually see things with their physical eyes. So they could see apparitions like in their external environment. They could see orbs, they could see light. But subjective clairvoyance is more our inner vision. And the easiest way that I like to describe it in the way that I describe it to my son, because I have an 8-year-old. And so the way that I describe it to him is I describe it as your inside eyes. So when you go to sleep at night and you close your physical eyes, there's a part of you that's still seeing because you can see your dreams. And that is the same, that ability to see within is the same ability that we use when we're accessing our psychic vision or our clairvoyance.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know when I was growing up, I was kind of discouraged from being too dreamy, too imaginative. I guess that's a problem for a lot of people these days. Stop daydreaming, in the class, just looking out the window, stop daydreaming, get real. Do you think this kind of it kind of gets in the way of a lot of people really reconnecting with their vision?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I send my son to a Waldorf school on purpose because I think that, in that education system, they actually try to retain that dreaminess as long as possible because they see it as a strength, right? But I think what happens is that as we go along, as we move out into the world and into these structures, the education system, we're kind of told or programmed or conditioned how to think and how to be. And we're very much programmed to be logical and intellectual, and that can take away from our psychic senses and our psychic vision, right? Because sometimes those two things can be in conflict with each other, not always, but they can be. And so when we get a little bit too left-brained or too logical or too intellectual, sometimes we lose that right-brained, more creative, more artistic, more dreamy side of ourselves. And that's the side that we actually utilize in our psychic development. So definitely we need a balance.
Yeah. Well, all education is heavily left-brained, isn't it? So
Yeah.
you might have a very right-brained kid going through. I mean, I was a bit like that going through all this, and then you start to get kind of a bit top-heavy on the left brain. Your head
Yeah, it's
starts
true.
pulling downwards.
Yeah, there's an
How
imbalance. Yeah.
how do you rebalance? Someone who's gone through this. Let's say someone's coming to this recording
Yeah.
as a adult in their 20s. How do they go, oh my God, I need to rebalance? How do I do it? What would you suggest to rebalance those two hemispheres, these two sides of us?
Oh, there's so many ways to do that. The first thing that comes to mind is meditation, because when you meditate, you're actually starting to slow down that nonstop thinking that happens. That's kind of, again, drawing us away a lot of times from our intuition. A lot of times that nonstop voice in your head that's constantly thinking is the voice of programming or conditioning, right? So when that's just nonstop all day long, feeding you thoughts, and you're identified with those thoughts, meaning you can't step back and realize that that's not who you are, that, that in itself can really take away from developing your intuition. So meditation, I recommend almost like as a prescription for anything. The other thing you could do is something creative. Even if you don't consider yourself to be artistic, you could go out and get a coloring book and some pencil crayons, right? And then just color. And then you're activating that more creative, playful, childlike right brain side of yourself as well. And then the third thing I'd recommend is actually, I found such a huge shift from yoga, more specifically like Kundalini yoga, because it starts to really balance the hemispheres of your brain and has an effect on your third eye or your pineal gland as well. So something like that kind of practice is kind of all encompassing. So.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, if someone was to say to you, well, I'm going to ask you now, what's the difference between psychic vision, creative visualization, and mental rehearsal? A lot of people in the acting world are getting into creative visualization and mental rehearsal, and it's kind of becoming fashionable. But
Yeah.
psychic vision still sounds a bit woo-woo. What would you say the differences are between these areas?
Yeah, so I think the difference is in one capacity you're receiving and one capacity you're sending. It happens in the same area, I think, of your brain, that third eye area, the very center of your head. Your third eye, by the way, is not like right here on your forehead. It's in the center of your head. So that area of the brain is what governs both those things, both receiving and sending. But I'd say if you're visualizing or you're imagining, you're using your inner vision to create an image or send an image. Whereas if you're receiving a clairvoyant imagery, you're using that same aspect of the brain, but you're actually acting as a receiver. So you can imagine like you're just a little radio receiver and you're receiving a signal, and the way that's coming in is through the third eye, and then you see it as a vision or an image or a little movie in your mind's eye. So they're very similar. I can see how that would be confusing, and people would get those two things confused, but yeah, one is sending, one is receiving.
So, yeah, if someone is very masculine, whether a woman or a man, used to doing and, acting and pushing and making things happen,
yeah,
the idea of just receiving might sound a bit foreign to them. So I guess things like
totally.
meditation again would be like, how do we still, how do we receive? Yeah, what about someone who's got this very strong masculine again? Is it again like what you're saying, just creative stuff, still stuff, sitting in nature? Is it that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I want to point out that our society or our culture is a bit imbalanced in that regard too. There's a heavy focus on always doing and achieving and right, this action, which in and of itself isn't bad or negative. It's just that it needs to be balanced with this more feminine receiving quality, right? So one thing I'm aware of actually as I'm talking about this is that the left side of your body is more your receiving side, right? We have one side that's masculine, one side that's feminine. So what I found is that sitting in meditation and actually drawing more attention awareness to the left side of my body. And even when you do start to develop psychically, that's a lot of times where you feel energy coming in or you feel a guide beside you on the left side. So focusing on that side of your body can really help, I think.
Yeah, I realized that in my early days of meditating and doing all kinds of ritual work, I used to automatically close my right eye, but leave my left eye open. So just it's almost like allowing this side to just keep it, and this one, no, it's just shut down for a bit. You can just keep going down there.
That's
Um, what
awesome. Yeah.
what about trust? Because I hear a lot of people say this. How do I know I'm not just imagining something? And I say, well, you kind of are.
Yes.
Gateway, imagination is the gateway. But if someone says to you, I'm just imagining this, which is kind of discounting it, isn't it, really?
Well, I think, you start there. You start with acknowledging that, yeah, you may feel that you're imagining it, and that's okay to feel that. I think what I found on my journey is that, just like I said, when I started giving readings to complete strangers, and I knew that I didn't know these people, I had their first name and their phone number, and I started saying accurate things, then I started to realize that isn't my imagination, right? There's something there, and I started becoming curious. So I think if you're starting out and you feel like it's your imagination, just go with it. And then the more time you spend in meditation, the more time, things that you get affirmation on things, then the more you start to understand that there is something to it. And one exercise that I recommend that everybody do, if this is interesting to them, is to keep something called an intuitive journal or a psychic journal, where you sit in meditation every morning and you access your abilities and you ask for pieces of information and you write them down. You don't have to, read them right away. You can come back to them. But over time, what you start to notice is that you are getting accurate information, whether that's premonitions or guidance on your life or whatever it is. And you start to realize that, oh, that's accurate. That helped me. That served me. And then in that point in time, whether it's your imagination or not, it's like, well, this is helping me and this is accurate. So I'm going to keep doing it, right? Because that part of yourself that is questioning or criticizing or judging or wondering if it's imagination, again, that is that left brain critical inner talk aspect of yourself. And that's what you want to detach from. You can't detach from that, by you kind of just have to let that be there and then strengthen the other side of yourself in order to start to detach from that. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I heard a channel many years ago saying for channeling, it's really good to allow your mind to become still as a lake. And I thought, gosh, that's really a great image, still as a lake. I don't know if my mind was still as a lake at that time. We kind of developed, we have to be always using our mind. So do you think there are things in our reality, such as TV, lots of certain films, which actually disturb the mind and actually interfere with receiving?
yeah, definitely. Well, here's the thing is anytime you're interacting with anything, whether that's a TV show or a person, or you're out, at a physical location, you're exposing yourself to that energy. And a lot of times we're picking up that energy and we're taking it home with us and we're carrying it around in our fields, right? So until you clear that, and we talked about this, in our discussion, but until you start to clear that, you're very much influenced by that energy, whether you're aware of it or not. And it can have a positive effect if you're hanging around with very supportive, uplifting people, then, or like a place, then that can have a really positive effect on your energy. But what's true is that for most people, it's not an energizing influence, right? It's more draining, or it could be, someone who cares for you deeply, but who thinks that they know what's best for you. And so they're feeding you advice. That advice is maybe conflicting with your intuition. So you're exposing yourself to all of these energies, and it's not always supportive and it's not always reflective of your inner voice. So this is why we need solitude, we need quiet, we need that still lake. We need to bring ourselves back to center, and we usually have to be by ourselves to do that. People have such little time by themselves these days. They're so distracted and they're almost conditioned to have that distraction, like their physiology is feeding on that all the time, like being busy, being active, scrolling, whatever it is. So it's a real practice to start to back away from that and get your actual physiology comfortable with a different way of being in the world, which is more calm and centered and grounded and connected, right? It's a different feeling. It's almost like a habit that you have to cultivate so that it starts to feel right to you, right in your system.
I've heard it said many times, trust your first impressions. Why should we trust our first impressions?
Usually your first impression is that impression that comes at you psychically or intuitively before your mind has a chance to chime in and bring logic into it, right? So usually, and by the way, in terms of psychic senses, for most people, their easiest psychic sense to develop, and one that they have naturally, is that clairsentience, right? So that psychic sense of feeling. And I love to use Star Wars as an example of that because most people have seen Star Wars. So I have a bad feeling about this, or I have a good feeling about this, right? So if you ask anybody about anything, about a decision they have to make or a person they just met or anything, if you just ask them to tune in, well, what is your feeling about this? Do you have a good feeling about it or do you have a bad feeling about it? That's really reflective of what you're saying. It's that first energetic impression before your mind starts to chime in, and that conditioned voice, that programmed voice, starts to chime in with its opinion. So always go with your feeling and always go with the sensations. If you're connected with your body, those physical, somatic, physiological sensations and the energetic feeling, those, and I think you might have said this recently too, Steve, but those don't lie, right? That doesn't lie.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think I love Star Wars. Trust your
Yeah.
feeling. When I first heard that, I thought, that's so cool. Trust your feelings, Luke, and
Yeah.
all of I loved all that. Can I ask you, when we receive impressions through our third eye, our vision, are they always literal or can they be metaphorical?
With clairvoyance, it's very often metaphor, very, very often metaphor. And it also, what happens is, especially if you're receiving multidimensional communication from your guides or your higher self, they're using what I call your inner reference library. So our inner reference library is basically the library of everything we've ever experienced in our whole life. So every experience we've had, every movie we've seen, every TV show, every book, that's your inner reference library. And so when let's just say you're communicating with a guide or a guardian, and it's coming through that clairvoyant sense, oftentimes they're using that reference library, and that can very often be metaphorical. So it could, for example, it could be a symbol or a color or an object, and it's what meaning that holds for you. If you think about, okay, if I see a lemon, or it doesn't even matter, any object, or a red rose, or if I see any image in my mind, it's great to ask yourself, what does that image or what does that color mean to me? Because that's your inner reference library, and that's how your guides and guardians communicate with you. They're using this beautiful library that is your consciousness to communicate information. And yeah, it's very often metaphorical, just like dreams are. So that's when, on my bookshelf back there, I do have a couple of dream dictionaries, symbol dictionaries that you can study so that you expand your reference library and you start to become aware of what these different symbols and messages mean.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I get often flashes of movie scenes or scenes from a book that's telling me something. And for example, there was one person I was dating, and I had this flash from a book. It's not one that's super well known, and it was a warning. And I was like, oh, and it came a few times, and I started to heed the warning, thank goodness, and eventually got out of that one. But yeah, and other ones of Star Wars or other things. If I'm like tuning in, what's happening in this world event? Sometimes I get a scene from a film, and it's telling me, or a pattern, which is showing me, or landscape. Landscapes are another one. Well, here's a landscape, looks very barren, or over there's very juicy, or something. And so it's often giving me, as you say, metaphorical in my own little reference library, which is why I love reading and why I've watched so many films, because they kind of like trigger them, and I get
Yeah,
to.
totally. Like every single thing that you take in every day. I have a psychic medium friend that loves to go to like these little antique shops because he loves to he finds that helps his mediumship actually, to look at all these different antiques and objects from the past and that kind of thing. So every single thing that you encounter day to day is expanding your reference library. And that's there was a really famous psychic medium named Gordon Higginson from the UK, actually, and he always said that you peak as a medium when you're in your 70s, when you're in your mid 70s, and that's the reason, is because you spent your whole life taking in all of this information, and then towards the end of your life, it's this rich, juicy library that the spirit world can pull from. So,
oh well, I'm still waiting to peak then. That's good.
it gives us comfort, right? Like,
Yeah.
well, I'm still on my way. I still got lots of time.
So in my own self and also with clients, I've noticed there's a difference when something is genuinely coming through from spirit and when the ego's interfering. They're thinking
Yes,
too much.
definitely. Yes.
How would you say to someone, this is the distinction between this is guidance, this is spirit, this is angels speaking to you, and this is your own mind clearly interfering? Because I guess it can go from one to the other.
Definitely can, or you can have a blend of the two things. You can have your intuition or your psychic senses coming in, and then your mind is, giving its opinion, and that can be really confusing. I think going back to the fact that usually when it's mind, it's very verbal and it's very like protective. The mind is here to protect our identity, protect us in the world, and so there's usually a lot of fear around it, and just that feeling of, you don't want to step outside your comfort zone, whereas the soul, the intuition, your guides, your guardians are kind of usually encouraging you to step outside your comfort zone, and your mind is trying to keep you in it. So that's one way. But also, so the mind is very verbal. So you'll feel that come in terms of, streams of words or streams of thoughts. Whereas again, your clairvoyance, your psychic vision is very visual. So you'll receive pictures or movies in your mind's eye. And usually along with that, married with the psychic vision, you'll have a clairsentient sense or a feeling sense that marries those two things together, so that, you may receive a metaphor in terms of imagery, but how do you decipher it? How do you know what that means? And it's usually your clairsentience or your feeling that tells you what the meaning is. So you may, just for example, let's say I have a vision of a puppy. Well, that could mean a lot of things. Do I go out and buy a puppy, or right? Or am I supposed to be more playful? You may have no idea what that vision means, but your feeling will tell you exactly what the message is. It'll be like, well, I feel like maybe I need to be more playful, or maybe I feel like I should go out and buy a puppy. But it's your psychic senses married together that really help you interpret the information that you're receiving.
So let's say someone listening to this has an issue they want guidance on. Let's say they want to decide, should I go to Portugal or should I go to San Francisco for holiday? What would you suggest is a good way of tuning into their psychic vision, their psychic and spidey senses, of making a kind of decision? Let's just take that kind of a decision.
Yeah. So in that particular example, what I would do is suggest that the person, get really quiet. I put a lot of emphasis when I'm teaching with this notion of state of being. So when it comes to your state of being, what that means is you want your mind to be calm and your body to be relaxed, and you want this state of being that's reflective that you're in a receptive mode to receive information. If you're busy, if you're stressed, if you're worried, if you're drinking, like, those are not state of beings that are conducive to receiving psychic information. So the first thing is that you want to get quiet. You want to sit still. You don't want to try and get that answer right away, but you want to start to sit down and address your state of being first. So that's the first thing. And then I would say, in terms of decision making, you could ask for a psychic vision for that. But I feel like what would be even better is that you start to drop all of your energy and attention into your physical body, start to feel your physical body in space. You start to center yourself in the present moment. And then you bring those two options to mind. You bring option A to mind, and you notice how your body responds. Usually when it's that right answer, or they maybe not quote unquote right, but the one that would be of the higher path, let's say, that higher frequency, usually your body will respond with a feeling of excitement with that. And then you bring option B to mind, and you just witness how your body responds. So always, in terms of decision making, there's always going to be one option that feels a little bit more exciting, more passionate, more animated in your body, right? If you wanted to bring psychic vision into that too, you could ask for a guide or a guardian or your higher self to show you some symbols in your mind, about, you know, what would happen if I choose A, or what would happen if I choose B, and go about it that way. I think the quicker way, though, is just the somatic clairsentient sensation.
Fantastic. Let me give you a slightly harder example then, or a possibility.
Yeah.
And this is one that catches a lot of people out. And I think when there's something, for example, like romance that comes in the picture, suddenly the mind and the body goes, ooh, you know, they look good and they sound good, but are they really okay for me? So in that kind of scenario, what would you advise someone to do in terms of tuning in and checking them out?
That's a really great example, because in those types of situations, those are when your mind will really tend to hijack. So you first have to be aware that there's a good chance my mind is going to hijack this situation because of how badly I want a partner, or that kind of thing, right? Ultimately, what you want to do first is know yourself so well that you know where your blind spots are, and you know, maybe where you have unhealed wounds in terms of the past. And so you know that so well that you're almost ready for these situations before they come up. And so you're ready for your mind to start, convincing you. I think sometimes when you look back upon your past and you think about maybe signs or signals you would have gotten in past relationships, and then you notice how they turned out, did you follow that? Right? Those are good indicators, because usually what you see is that, oh, I did have like a bad feeling or a red flag about that person. I didn't follow it. And then what happened? So, yeah, I would say in that particular situation, if you're really hypnotized by the chemistry or whatever is coming up, then tuning into the psychic vision would actually be a better methodology for that, because it's very neutral. It's not emotional at all. Your third eye is not really an emotional center. Your heart is. Your third eye is not. And so it will give you clear guidance, right? It'll give you very clear guidance. So again, you'd sit down quietly, like I mentioned before, address your state of being, and then ask your higher self, your guides, your guardians to come in and start giving you maybe some imagery or some pictures that'll help you discern the truth of the
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, it's a good one, because I've heard many clients say, my intuition gave me a red warning light and I ignored it. You know, I'm like, well, why are you ignoring it? But again, it's that thing, oh, I really want one, and it overrides the whole thing. So I think in romance, it is one of the things. Third eye is a great point, really. The third eye is more neutral, and it's not going to get caught up in your, the lower sacral and the heart, which is like,
Yes.
oh, well, let's go and explore.
Yeah, your heart is very emotional. And that's a good thing to know, too, because we're all individuals and we're all individualistic. And so for someone who is very emotional to begin with, then accessing the third eye would actually be such a good practice and such a good skill to develop. Whereas if you're someone that's maybe not as emotional, then maybe accessing the heart would be more beneficial. Again, it's all about balance. But I think I just want to bring this up, and people don't like when I say this, but when it comes to that romance thing that you just mentioned, a lot of times if you're viewing life through a spiritual perspective, which this our audience is, then this notion of twin flames really I've noticed has really kind of got in there, and the mind starts hijacking it that way. And this is my twin flame. It might not be your twin flame. It could just be your mind telling you that it's your twin flame.
I think most often that is the case. I've heard
Yes.
some crazy stories, which, yeah, I mean, absolutely bizarre stories. I think there was one client who dated someone for 2 weeks, 20 years before, and got in touch with them and found out they were gay, but still said, they're my twin flame. We're going to be together. I'm like, they're gay, probably in a relationship. You haven't spoken for 20 years and you only had 2 weeks dating. Why would you think that?
Yes,
Like,
exactly. Again, this is where meditation is really important, everyone. Because as you meditate, you distance yourself from that dialogue of your mind so you can discern, is this true? Or is my mind just, feeding me a romanticized story, right? So meditation all the way. Yeah.
meditation. So, Karen, can you say something about your work, what you're up to, what you're offering people?
Yeah, sure. So, I have two main focuses right now. One is my YouTube channel, where I offer it's like a little bit of a variety show. So I have interviews on there. It's a great interview with you, Steve, on there. I have a lot of my channeled material up there, and then I have some psychic development little videos too. So that's one thing I'm working on that I love and I'm super excited about. And then the other thing is my Patreon community, where I have a monthly subscription, and there's different tiers and different offerings from, we meditate every week together on Zoom, which is fun, and all of those are archived. I also have live channeled sessions and live classes through my Patreon as well. So those are my two main focuses and that I'm super excited about.
Fantastic. It's always great talking to you. I love the Canadian accent, like out and about. It's just so, it's soothing. It's like a soothing. It's a bit like New Zealand singing. They have this kind of singing accent. It's kind of really nice, the Canadian accent. So
yeah, I obviously don't even notice it until you can literally cross the border to the US an hour from my house. And the minute you cross the border, it's like a huge accent difference. It's hilarious that happens, but it's true.
And just to remind people, your website is intuitivekb.com, and a link will be going out with this podcast. And there will also be a meditation connected to this interview, so please watch out for the link to that as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Steve, for having me. I love talking to you.
Thanks, Karen.